Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Commando Blog podcast. My name is Don, and I'm joined by our fellow TKB podcasters, Low Speed and 9ATF. And we have a special guest here. We have the Silah Report Con-in-Chief himself, and he's going to be talking about his new book that's coming out, Into Helmand with Walking Dead, a story of combat in Afghanistan. It's definitely sure to be of interest to many of our viewers, many of our readers, and we felt that this was something that deserved to be podcasted to get out there onto our channel for our viewers to see. Of course, we have a lot of crossover between our own audience and Silah Report, and we're glad to have Miles on again for the second time. This is our second stream with him, so go ahead and introduce yourself. What's new? What's happened since the last time we had you on?
Heck yeah, Don. Well, first of all, this is like I was saying earlier, this is a double honor. I mean, the first time was an honor. Now this is a second honor. So, how do you repay back an honor to begin with? I repay you back times two. I don't know how. This is pretty cool to be talking to you guys again. It's such a neat thing that you guys have going on with the Commando blog. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for
Thanks,
that.
man. So, what would you tell somebody like me or like any of them who hasn't read the book? What is this about? We know it's about combat in Afghanistan. What's it really about?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there aren't many similar books like this out there. And really the biggest reason for that is, while I was in my service, well, first of all, to sort of, put an introduction on this is that, as I was growing up and I was interested in the military and in military history and eventually in serving myself, the biggest thing is that throughout my interest in military history, I was never interested in the grand view of things and the strategy or the tactics, what the commanders were thinking, what the officers were thinking. That really didn't hold anything to me. What fascinated me was, the first person perspectives, the first person viewpoints of a lot of the soldiers and the guys that were, in a lot of these historic battles and fighting throughout war. From several hundred years ago up into when I was growing up, reading about Black Hawk Down and Jarhead were particularly important books to me in terms of that. But I was more interested in those first person perspectives of, what was it like to sort of, be on that battlefield? What was it like to just live in the suck? And what was it like to have your buddies getting killed all around you? That was what I was always interested in. And that led to me being interested in enlisting in the Marine Corps in 2010, primarily because I'm a very sort of experienced guy. I'm very visceral. I want to see it for myself. And, I take that into some of my gun writing with Silah Report and TFB and other examples where I want to find out, what was it like to hold that gun? What was it like to fire that gun in combat? What was it like to clean that thing? And that's what I'm all about. So I went into and the whole reason why I enlisted was, directly due to that aspect of being interested in, what was it like? I wanted to be the lowest guy on that totem pole, and I want to know what it's like to be in that role that I've read so much about previously. And, I went to school, I applied to college. I could have very easily gone the whole officer route. I could have very easily gotten an NROTC scholarship or an Army ROTC scholarship, and I could have gone in as an officer 4 years later. I didn't want that though. I wanted that very visceral, basic experience. And so what that leads into, and what I say is there's not many that are similar books like this, is that as I was a teenager reading about some of the fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, I was reading some very fascinating stuff. But all these accounts I was reading, I mean, we can talk about, Generation Kill, the book that was based on, One Bullet Away. We can talk about some of the other books that came out that I remember. But all the stuff was really good, but a lot of it was written from this perspective of either officers or special operations perspective or a senior enlisted perspective. And even to the point of guys who are writing books and co-authors with other people and who like they're writing it and they're actually getting someone else to write it for them. And as I'm doing my own service, I enlist in 2010, I deploy in 2011, I deploy again in 2013 to 14, all both times to Helmand province. And, but as I'm doing my own thing, it's actually kind of frustrating to me in that I'm looking at all these other books that are coming out about the war. And I'm like, dude, there's no book out there that tells the story that I looked forward to. And I didn't, and it's not like writing a book about this, about my time in the Marines wasn't something I went into it with. It wasn't like I went to boot camp and I'm like, all right, this is gonna be great. I'm like being a method actor here. Like I'm gonna be writing a book about this later on. Like, let's see how these experiences pan out. That didn't happen. I really started having this sort of like gap niche in this experience in 2013, late 2013, probably about midway through my second deployment, and it especially hit me, after my section leader was killed, after some of the combat we went through on that second deployment, and really just thinking like, man, like this is a story that needs to get told, and no one else is doing it. There's an army guy Colby Buzzle, who wrote a book called My War, but his book was a kind of like compilation of his MySpace posts that he would write, or his blog posts. There's another book by a reservist from New York, and there are two books by army soldiers who are enlisted guys from reservists, both of them reservists from New York, I think. And they wrote some interesting stuff, but it wasn't the perspective that I wanted. It wasn't the active duty junior infantryman's perspective on this stuff. And that's kind of, you talk about like what books are similar to this. Well, there, in terms of being a junior infantryman in the Marine Corps, there aren't that many. There actually aren't any. There's another book by a guy named Lucas Dreyer who wrote a neat book called Battle Handshakes: The Story of Alpha 1-5. Now that was a very well written piece, and I wanted sort of to add to that kind of thing. And that's kind of where I came at with this. And I started it in 2013, and I just started putting stuff down on paper and just writing down random stories. Then later on, I started connecting the dots and stuff. And then when I got to about maybe 80 pages and I was in college at IU, I was like, man, I really want to work on this with people. So I started working with professors and sending it out and stuff. And it just kind of evolves into where it is today, into it getting US publication week before last.
I'm curious, having heard about like your method of writing and talking about the books you read growing up. Am I wrong here? But does like the book you're writing almost harken back to some of the stuff guys would write after like World War II?
It's a memoir like any other memoir, and it's like, and all those books that you're talking about, from Second World War, First World War, Vietnam, it's like those were the books that I grew up on. Those were the books that I read like cover to cover. The Donald Burgett series of when he wrote about his time with the 101st, I read every single one of those. Black Hawk Down, I read 18 times. When I saw Jarhead in a bookstore, I was like, I have to buy it. These were the books that I was kind of used to, and these were the books that I went after. I didn't look at, the Second World War, and I was like I'd see books about the generals or the strategy, or, the officers' war, that, regimental commanders' take on things. And I always looked at that stuff and I was like, I'm not interested in that. That's, I'll let someone else worry about the strategy and that kind of thing. I want to know what did those guys go through? How did they feel? What were their emotions? What were their experiences? I want to know that. And then sort of throughout my service, I was like, where is that book of my generation? It's not there, so I have to write it. And that was kind of my response to it.
Absolutely. So, from an outside perspective, you wouldn't think that there would be a shortage of firsthand accounts or putting something under a microscope versus the abundant amount of media and reading material out there that covers things on the grand scale versus a firsthand emotional account of either just a soldier or Marine in combat in the modern sense. So I didn't even know that.
They're few and far between, and they're scattered around. And like the only ones that I can pick out are the ones I just mentioned, of like, where's my story being told? There's these two army guys who wrote those two books, Colby Buzzle and the other guy, and then there's the Lucas Dreyer book that I told you about. There's that. But there's not that many. They're far outweighed by the platoon commanders or the company commanders or the special operations guys and all this other stuff.
I really appreciate to have like the grunt experience, because you don't really see that often. Like the actual proper boots on ground, like I'm gonna go to war, God help me. You see that a lot before when you had like conscript armies, because a lot of the guys who were down there were just conscripts. They are not officers like high rank, and they're not going up. They're like, they have their actual Call of Duty, okay, and they're just going kind of like, all right, well, fine, I'm not gonna dodge the draft. I'm gonna go in, okay. And then some of them wrote books about it. And you don't see that very often. So I'm really excited about that aspect of this book.
Yeah, no, it's a kind of similar approach, man.
I'm excited to see this also as like that experience that you wrote it when it was fresh. I think this is going to be something really useful as like people 20, 30, 40 years from now try to understand, our conflict in Afghanistan, America's longest war. I think it's also going to be very valuable then. But, one other thing, I think you mentioned it to me a little before. Could you speak a little bit about your co-author on the book? Because I know that's a bit of a complex topic.
Yeah, well, Kevin isn't around to see this book come to fruition because he killed himself in September of 2015. And Kevin was in my company in Charlie 19, and he completely separate from me, kind of how like two paths come out and then they just are completely separate from each other, but then they just join up by coincident, circumstance. But he had this idea. He had the same idea I had. He posted it on Facebook one day. He was like, "Hey, isn't anybody else pissed off that like the only stories being told about this war are like by SF guys or these officers or stuff like that? Like, where the heck are our stories? And like, doesn't that piss anybody else off? Like, I'm gonna write one." And he on the second deployment was with Charlie. I was with Bravo Company by that time, and he was at a patrol base outside of Leavenworth called Patrol Base Boldak. And Boldak actually saw substantially more combat than the rest of the battalion on that 13 to 14 deployment. So he definitely had some amazing stories to tell, right? So I saw him post that on Facebook, and I instantly got in touch with him, and I was like, dude, I've got the exact same thing that you have. That's exactly what I want to do. And he was psyched to hear that I was about that, and I was psyched to hear that he was about that. And I was like, wow, this is great. We should meet up and talk about this and stuff. And he was in Ohio and I was in Indiana, and I always meant to go meet up with him and stuff, and we were interested about that. But then like a couple months later, he committed suicide on September 28th of 2015 outside of his house in Ohio.
Oh my goodness.
So he was survived by his widow, Abby Schranz, who has since gotten remarried, and they'd been married since he was in the fleet. And, they met while they were in the fleet. Very happy, very successful relationship, unlike a lot of relationships in the fleet. So, Kevin kind of stands out as that. And in terms of background, I mean, Kevin and I were very similar in terms of our interests in military history and looking at stuff. I mean, Kevin named his dog Panzer. He owned an M1. He owned a Mosin Nagant. And we used his M1 in the TFB TV live fire that we did in Indiana. I drove out. It was actually a last bit of desperation. I needed like one more M1 rifle for this live fire shoot we were doing. And I posted on Facebook, does anyone have an M1 rifle they'd be willing to let us borrow? And Abby posted it, and I was like, yeah, I've got Kevin's. He's not using it. So I drove out and got it, and we used it there, and we tried to honor him that way. Because that would be something that if I had called up Kevin at that time, like, yo, dude, we're doing a live fire shoot with all World War II weapons on a live fire range in Indiana, like, he'd be like, all right, stop talking. Like, I'm driving right now. He'd be that kind of dude. But yeah, no, he was a really legit guy, in that sense, in all the senses actually. So what it comes down to though, with him being my co-author, he had written about 20 pages of stories about Patrol Base Boldak, and I worked with Abby, and Abby got me those 20 pages, and I incorporated them into the text here. And so you see some of his writing in the beginning, in sort of the intro portion of Into Helmand with The Walking Dead, and then you also see it at the end, and then you also see it on talking about the second deployment, where we include some of the stories there. And we did it in a way where you can't really tell whether it's me talking or it's his voice or my voice. You'll be able to read through the lines pretty easily and be able to be like, yeah, okay, this looks like Kevin or this looks like me.
Yeah, that's incredibly thoughtful to include him on it after all that happened, and I'm sure he'd be very proud.
I just also think it's like a wonderful testament too, as someone who's like really into military history and really into like that kind of stuff growing up, to actually have a book that hopefully in the future people can refer to kind of get an understanding of like what his conflict, what his life was about. It's almost like you think about something you enjoyed and you were into growing up, and then you can kind of contribute to it going on and so on and so forth through history.
Right. And I suppose what I wanted to ask or wanted to say was, and I'm sure it goes without saying, but I'm sure he was a major inspiration for getting this book finished, right? Do you feel that, depending on how things went, do you think this book would have come out later? Do you think it would have been affected at all by him having left? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think in terms of the publication timeline, it didn't affect anything. The way this book came out, the way this book came to publication was a crazy, weird weave of relationships and connections that just happened. And I just got put in touch with a publisher through a guy who I knew through weird other circumstances. And that's how it got published. That's what I attribute to. And I'm gonna definitely shout out to Miguel Miranda from 21st Century Asian Arms Race. Really friendly, really cool guy in the Philippines. He is the reason why this book exists, to be absolutely honest. This is why people have been asking me, now that the book's out, people have been asking me like, hey man, okay, like how do you go about publishing? Like I'm thinking about publishing or this, that, and other. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I can't tell you. Like I cannot tell you how to go about publishing, because the way it happened to me was not a traditional, I don't know, submit to publishers and this and that. I didn't go through 20 publishers before getting rejected or accepted or whatever. Weird, right?
Oh, absolutely. Self-publishing, I've heard so many stories from others. We have done a few mini podcasts with other authors and some full-length podcasts with authors, and they all say that same thing. Like they don't really have an answer. There's no direct way or right way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But one thing I will add though, I will say something in cement is like the one thing that does make a difference is you better have something to hand someone. Content is king, and if you're looking to publish or if you're looking to do anything, really with anything in life, right? You better have your portfolio spot on. What I would say is like when you get to that magic moment of you get to that weird connection, relationship, whatever, if someone says, "Let me give you a chance. What do you got?" If you hand them an empty plate, you've just lost the connection of a lifetime. So you need to have something in your hand like, oh, this is what I got. Boom, 200 pages in your face. Take it or leave it kind of thing. I run into people all the time who are like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And it's like, what do you got, man? Like, where are your articles? Like, where are your articles? I want to write about guns. Okay, well, where's your article? Oh, I want to do video. Well, where's your video? Like, I want to write this. Well, where's your material? If you don't have something to hand someone right there, it's like, that's what you need to have. I mean, I'll digress with that point. But I mean, you mentioned earlier, like, where was Kevin in all this when he killed himself? The book was still, and the text was still in this. I don't know, maybe I was up to like 150 pages by that point. But the text was still in that. I went to this long phase of like, what do I have? Is this even worth it? Is anyone even interested in reading this? This is just a freaking like pages file on my Mac like that I just randomly go into every once in a while and look at. It's like, what is this? But when he died, it was like it kind of doubled down on my efforts of like I have to see this through. My conviction sort of doubled. Before I was like, man, it would be really cool to get this published. Like it would really mean a lot. Da da da. But when he killed himself, it was like, no, this has to happen. This absolutely has to happen. I have to pour everything I have into it and at least give it my best shot and try my best, if not anything for him, for his sake as well. So that was a key motivator for sure. But in terms of like the publication timeline, it didn't make a difference when I eventually got to publishing there. That was not altered either way.
You can imagine it's a pretty big time difference, like because the guy passed away in like 2015, and we're like 5 years have passed. Everyone's, you die twice, right? First when you draw your last breath, and the second time when somebody says your name for the last time. And what you're doing is you're giving his name, and most importantly, his memory, like a new life. And not just one, but a really, really good one. Like you're literally doing something that people are going to look back from now for like years and years and years on. Like Will Speed said, like, look, there just aren't that many, pretty much none, experiences from the ground up, from a grunt, from a guy who's living there, foot's on the ground, just doing what needs to be done. You don't fucking see that. And the fact that you're going ahead and that you're getting his name out in a book of this caliber, like, hell, I'm pretty, like, you're literally giving his name life even more.
I hope so, man. I know, and I hope that's the case. That generations of people from now on. I mean, even if it doesn't make it past this first publishing run, it's still out there. Like it's in the record. Like you can't get rid of it. Like yeah. As long as the internet exists, whenever you look up, either Miles Vining or Kevin Schranz, like you will find it. Or you look up this book, you will find it. Or you look up books about Afghanistan, like his name will eventually come up in your search query, right? So yeah, no, I'll definitely agree with that, and it's an honor to be able to do that for sure.
I think it's going to go a long way. I have confidence in that.
Well, thanks, man. We'll see. We'll see how what the movie deal shows up like.
Oh my goodness.
So here's the question: if there's going to be an actor portraying you, what actor would you like to portray
Wow,
Miles?
good question.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. I think Shia LaBeouf.
Oh
I
really?
can see it.
Yeah, I can see
it.
that. I can actually see that.
We
I
just
love
need to
that.
dye.
I love
We
it
just need
so
to.
much.
We just need
Yeah.
to have him dye his hair. But yeah, I could see that. We need to get a picture of that for the stream.
Yeah, because I
That'd be
think like
wonderful.
people have actually come up to me and be like, "You look exactly like Shia LaBeouf." And when I first started telling me that, I was like, "Who's Shia LaBeouf?" And they were like, "You haven't seen Transformers?" I was like, "Oh, that weenie? Like, come on."
Yeah, come on, dude. What the fuck? Like, at least I got some muscle, you know? Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, man, at
exactly.
least you don't have his character, already.
Oh man.
So,
On a slightly more serious note, so I think with the initial release of the book, you're doing something a little interesting. Could you tell us something about that? And also, there's a charity involved. I think that's also bears mentioning because it seems like it's given the topic something very important to discuss, and with today's climate.
So you're talking about with donating proceeds to warrior expeditions?
Of course, yeah, that's what I was mentioning. If you give a little color on that, and how you are releasing the book currently.
So warrior expeditions, they do a really cool thing where warrior expeditions takes combat vets in the United States and they completely fund them to do a through hike or a through ride or a boat trip. And what I mean by that is they'll take combat vets who apply to the program and they'll have a selection process and they'll figure out who they want to fund. And essentially, they take guys and girls and they give them all the equipment they need, like top of the line hiking gear, from all these good name brand companies, all this stuff, and then they stick them on a trail, on a national scenic trail. And there's a difference between, like a trail that might be in your backyard or your community park trail or something and a national scenic trail. A national scenic trail is an outdoor trail that has been chartered by Congress to represent some of the great trails in the United States. So I think there's about a dozen. I mean, the Appalachian Trail, that's a national scenic trail, right? It starts in Georgia and it goes to Maine, and that's one continuous footpath, right? And so that's one. You have the Pacific Crest Trail, you have the Continental Divide Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail is essentially the Appalachian Trail, but on the West Coast in California, the Continental Divide Trail is a trail that goes down the Continental Divide in the middle of the United States. And so they'll take vets, give them all the gear they need, stick them on the beginning of this trail and say like, all right, dude, work out your problems on this trail, and transitioning back to civil society and see you at the other end. And they'll check up every now and then. And essentially they give combat vets the opportunity to hike these trails from start to finish. And in some cases, like the Appalachians, that takes like 4 to 6 months if you're walking, you're pushing like 10, 20 miles every single day. A lot of times it takes people 8 months to a year. The trail that I did was called the Ice Age Trail in Wisconsin. It's significant because it's the only national scenic trail that is completely contained within a single state. All these other national scenic trails go from like Appalachian, it goes from Georgia to Maine. It crosses all the different states. And before I talk about the Ice Age, the other two things that Warrior Expeditions does is puts guys on bicycles. So they'll go from the East Coast to the West Coast on a bike. And that's the point of that, is to bike the entire way. And then another point is with the kayaking. I think it's Warrior Kayak, they call it. But they do the same thing except on a waterway. So go down like the Mississippi from north to south, right? So Ice Age Trail, I hiked it in 2016, the summer of 2016. And there's another guy that was picked on there, a guy named Michael Maziarka, who me and him became fond friends afterwards. But we hiked the trail from, it was 1,200 miles from the western Wisconsin to eastern Wisconsin. And we walked the whole portion of the trail, sometimes moving 5 miles, sometimes moving 30 miles in a single day. And then what Warrior Hike does is they organize, because the thing is, to hike these trails, it's an extremely daunting task, both physically, financially, and mentally. So financially, because you have to fund the food, you have to fund the gear, you have to fund all this stuff that you to go on this trail. And that's something a lot of people can't take off time to do. And most of the people who do these trails are either like folks who like have scraps for a living and then just dedicate themselves to this, or they're retirees who can do it. Like a working class person, someone who's like trying to make a living or going to college, you can't really hike the Appalachian in between semesters, right? So what Warrior Hike does is they give you all the gear, but then they also give you all the connections, and they partner with VFWs and American Legions along the way. So the way it works is you go a week in the woods and you're hiking every day, and then you get to the weekend and you get picked up by like a local VFW that you've hiked out to. They'll pick you up, they'll put you set you up in a hotel or a motel or somebody's house, or they'll just let you camp out in someone's yard, and then they'll help you out with anything you need in that way, let you rest for a day or two. Usually this leads to a lot of drinking at the VFWs on Friday nights or Saturday nights, and then you get set right back on the trail starting on Monday or Sunday, and you're right back out and you're sleeping every night out in the boondocks and stuff. And the point of Warrior Hike dates back to the first guy to hike the Appalachian Trail, who was a World War II vet, an infantry guy. After the Second World War, he was the first guy to hike the trail, and his famous words were, "I'm going to go walk off the war." And he hiked the entire trail from Georgia to Maine, and then he did it again in I think the 70s or the 80s or something. Like as an older guy, he hiked it all again. And the guy who started Warrior Hike is a guy named Sean Gobin, who started it when he got out of the Marines in whatever it was, 2012 or 2013. And he was the same way. And he just got fixated about, I got to hike this trail. And he did it. And the thing that helps with that, with a lot of the guys, that the way it's supposed to work and the way it does work, and definitely how it worked for me, is you put someone in that environment of just hiking every single day, and you are literally alone with your thoughts. Like there's no other people around you. You're not hiking with other people. Like, yeah, you are assigned, you have other hikers, other warrior hikers. The Appalachian, I think 12 to 20 vets get the Appalachian Trail every year. With me and Michael Maziarka, it was just me and him. And we were actually kind of an all-ball group, because we actually got to be friends over the course of the time, and we actually hiked together the entire time. We could have easily just not hiked together and been completely alone, but we got along pretty well, and we just eventually hiked together. But other than that, it's like you're just alone every single day. And the point of that is to decompress. And the point of that is to be alone with your thoughts and your experiences and to work through a lot of stuff. And one of the issues with the service, with the active duty component, I'll say, is that everything is happening when guys are in, things are happening so fast. It's like you go through very traumatic experiences, and it's very hard to decompress from them, because as soon as you're done with one, you're pushing on to the next thing. It's like there's no time to waste. There's no time to just chill out. And I mean, it's like, whether it's a training evolution, or whether it's on deployment, or whether it's this or that. And it's not just stuff in combat. I mean, it's stuff in the rear, it's stuff growing up, and especially like being a young man in that environment, the issues and tribulations that you're going through, and personal relationships, and outside of it, and family stuff and everything. And you're going through all this, but because it's so high paced and it's so high tempo, it's like you don't got time. Like the platoon sergeant doesn't have time for you to freaking moan about whatever just happened. It's like you need to be out there police calling this field or getting ready for this next patrol. You need to keep going, man. It's go time 100% of the time. There is no decompression. It's compression every day and every second. Boom, 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 right? And so the point of Warrior Hike is like, all right, decompress, let everything out, freaking, and then you're just stuck with these memories to relive them again and again and again. And the point of Warrior Hike is to like go over that stuff and to come to a conclusion and be like, man, what the heck did I just go through? And that's kind of the point of that. I'll give you a very simple example. well, a guy named Rodriguez who was in weapons platoon in Charlie Company. I met up with him actually at Schranz's memorial service when he killed himself. And I was talking to Rodriguez, and he was like, "Dude, when we were deployed in 2011, like his sister had died of like I forget it was like a car wreck or a thing or something, and like he was sad that his sister had died. He was like, "Oh crap, my sister died," but he couldn't go to the funeral. He was deployed. It was like, you can't just go back it's hard to go back for those kinds of things. So his sister died, and he was like, "All right, that sucks." He comes back from deployment, sees his family, obviously not his sister, and he's like, "All right, yeah, this sucks." Like, da da da. He cries a little bit, I guess. And then guess what? He's going into the next training evolution. He's getting ready for the next deployment. He's training his new boots. He's going to his machine gunner course, his advanced machine gun leaders, whatever, blah, blah, blah. He's going on the next deployment, go to the next unit, boom, boom, boom. And he was telling me afterwards, he was like, "Dude, it was only until I got out. And 2 years after I got out, he was like, oh, crap, my sister died." Like, what? It took him that long to mentally decompress to that point. So that's just a micro example of something like that. And that's a big difference that Warrior Hike helps with stuff like that. And that's what Warrior Hike is all about. So I picked, I was talking with Abby and I deferred to her. I was like, "Hey, I want to donate a certain portion of this stuff to a group that is into helping veterans and stuff." And, I honestly left it up to Abby. I was like, "Abby, if there's anywhere you think that you want this stuff to go to, like proceeds to go to, it's like, let me know." My personal choice is Warrior Expeditions, because I know it helped me and it was definitely a good organization and fit for me that worked really well. But she thought about some things and she eventually got back to me and she was like, "No, I'm okay with Warrior Hike." So we both decided we'll stick with Warrior Hike and Warrior Expeditions for that. And that's how we came to go up there.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a similar experience myself because I was doing my military specialization training when my father passed away, and I couldn't attend the funeral either. And that shit, it's genuinely tough on you because you end up like at least for me, I don't know if the guy was the same, but you end up in a mindset where it's like, well, I gotta finish this. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter that my father passed away. The outside world doesn't exist. That's the mindset you go to. It's like, I'm just going to focus on, okay, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this, I got to do that. And you just like bottle everything in. And you just get into like a sort of like a blank mindset where you can't cry because your own body's like, I don't have the time to focus on this stuff. I got other things to do. And I wasn't even on deployment, let alone a guy whose like lives are depending on him and who is a part of a very important chain that needs to remain strong. And that's brutal. I couldn't handle it. I had to leave after my specialization, and then I joined the informal stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a moral dilemma too, because for my buddy Rodriguez, it's like he's on his deployment in Nawa, combat deployment, 2011. Think you get that news, "Oh, my sister just died." It's like the reality of it is, all right, sister's dead. She's not going to get any more dead, and she's not going to get any more alive. The boys to my left and right over here, that they're depending on me with my machine gun to work with them, they are still alive. They need to keep being alive. And one of the differences that I can do to help them stay alive is by me being here. By me going back to my sister's funeral, the only person I'm serving in that equation is myself, which is a very selfish feeling on deployment. So like Rodriguez, like, I didn't ask Rodriguez if like, dude, did you have the opportunity to request emergency leave and go back to the funeral? And I almost feel like if I asked him that, he would be like, that was probably offered to me by my platoon sergeant. And I was like, no, like I can't leave these guys I'm with right now for that kind of thing. So it's a moral dilemma at that point.
At least for me, the way that it was, if I was to get out, because I wasn't even done with my fucking training, and I can imagine probably for some guys in deployment, it'd be the same. It's like if you leave right now, you're leaving because you're like under a mental duress, which means that you're not living with obviously you're not living with an honorable discharge, but you're not even living with a regular discharge. You might be living with a medical one, and that really can fuck you up in the future if you ever want to like rejoin the military. And that's something you think about. It's like, do I risk my future for something that's already done? And then you end up saying no, and then you like bottle everything in, and you don't mourn, you don't do anything, just like bottle in, and it's like, all right, well, fucking keep working. In his case, more important because he's actually got like lives that depend on him. So
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on your head with your own father. That's sucky to hear about, man.
Regardless, it's tough. It's and I gotta say, honestly, especially for the guys who are like in actual combat deployments, so it's fucking admirable. It's hell. It's fucking hell for them, and it's absolutely admirable that they're like, I can't let my brothers down. Like this guy's depend on me, and I can't let them out. It doesn't anything else. The outside world doesn't matter. I'm gonna be there for my friends. I'm gonna be there for my brothers. I'm gonna help them. It's fucking admirable.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about it in the book. At the end of my first deployment, I got picked to go in the armory, so I had to go back 2 weeks early, and that messed with me. And that was like orders, right? Because it's like it came up from the
Yep.
company commander that was like, "All right, you are going back 2 weeks early to be in the armory to check guns in when the rest of the company comes back." It's in the Marine Corps, the term for it is advon, like the guys who go ahead of the main unit to get everything ready for when the main unit comes in. And that pissed me off because I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I got to leave my boys 2 weeks more on this patrol base? I can't do that. Like, I'm needed here. This is where I'm needed, not anywhere else. I don't care what excuse you come up with. I'm not needed anywhere else. I'm needed here. You know."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because those guys are your fucking family. You know, it's like fucking. These are the people that you're spending so fucking long with. They are your friends. They're the people that you literally rely on life and death situations, and you create this life-lasting bonds with them. To just go ahead and be like, yeah, no, sorry, you fucking live them up, go do whatever bullshit somewhere else, and if they die, they die. It's just shitty. It's absolutely fucking shitty. I understand why, like, sort of like chain of command thing happened, but to then, and this is why I really like this fucking book. Because you're telling it like you're not some fucking higher up commander who's like, all right, well, fucking, I gotta go, you know, like some NCO with a stick up his ass. You understand what is that brotherhood that you have with your guys, where you understand that, hey, you might make a difference, like, or you might not. It may not. Ideally, obviously, it doesn't happen, and their life don't depend on you, and everything works. But in reality, you know that their lives could very well be depending on where not you're there to help them, and we're not you're there and you're in there. Like you're not there like thinking about some other stuff. You're there and you're focused and you're ready to do whatever it takes to make sure that all those guys get home.
It's absolutely correct. And I like the point you bring up. It's like, yeah, that situation might come, and then you might chicken out, and you might not be there for their boys, or you might be there for their boys. But if you have to bounce out of there early for whatever stupid reason, you're never going to know in that kind of case, right? And it's like, well, what if I was there? What if I had covered this position? What if I had been at this corner? What if I had that sector? What could I have shot better than the other guy? Would I not have stepped at that IED that made another guy run out and gather me up off the ground, and he stepped on an IED? You know, what the heck, man? So,
and I'd like to add one very important thing, especially helped me a ton. The way that you're saying right now, like all those what ifs, and a lot of people get them, right? And those what ifs, like very, very good friend of mine told me this, and it stuck to this day when I was like really struggling with my father passing away. All that, like you said, it doesn't matter if you then fucked off and you had to go to whatever other base or whatever. The same mindset can be applied in terms of like suicide, where like right now it might be really fucking shitty. Right now it might genuinely feel like it will never get any fucking better. But the only fucking way to know, the only absolute way that you can go ahead, you can actually know where not it's going to get worse, where not it's going to get better, is to actually be there. It will literally never get better if you kill yourself. Like that's just an undeniable fact. The only way to know if it will get better, which spoiler, almost every time it does, is to just be there for it. Is it tough? God fucking damn it, yeah, it is. All right, but again, the only way to know is to be there. And that's, for me, that was like the biggest thing that like drew me away. Like, yeah, suicide, bad idea. It's that. And I hope it helps some other people as well.
That's a good point. And I'm going to use that in the future. I'm going to steal that and use it in the future because, yeah.
Don't worry, I stole it myself, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're not going to know if it's going to get better if you're not there for it to get better, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But with that, and I'd like to talk about like something with PTSD and suicide, and especially with Kevin and all this other stuff, right? Well, first of all, like, I mean, the topic of PTSD and suicide is super important in this book. And I mean, for example, after every chapter in the book where guys committed suicide, like in the time that the chapter was taking place, like within that time period, whether I'm talking about like the first deployment or training between the two, or the second deployment, or when I'm in college, I list the names of all the guys who did take their lives at the end of the chapter, right? As sort of a testimony to people. And so, there's a Marine battalion. What was it? It was like 1-5 or like 2-5 in Sangin. They kind of got like they went through some very, very heavy combat in Sangin, and they kind of became prolific as like the suicide battalion because they had like 25 suicides or something. But it wasn't until like I started doing the tallies with 1-9, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, and I was like, wait, we've had like 25 plus suicides. And I was like, are you freaking serious? This is like a thing across the Marine Corps. Like, it's not that, with that. But the thing with that I want to say is that it's such a complicated topic, and especially with PTSD as well. And I mean, I'll take Kevin as the example, right? And I think the thing that if I could like tell people, like just like shake civilians and just be like, yo, this is the actual problem, dude. The conception, I mean, Matt Best makes a really good point of this in some of like in his book and in other stuff, is like the idea of like the poor, pitiful veteran who's just like the poor, pitiful, like combat vet who just like can't get over getting shot at. That's not the image that so many of us are in the United States. It's like when you think about combat, and if you look at Kevin, for example, you look at me, it's like both of us loved combat. We loved it. Like getting shot at, shooting at people. Are you kidding me? Like, this is what I signed up to do. I signed up to put a bullet in another guy's freaking head. Like, both because it's what I want to do as like a young man, and also because it's a mission I believe in doing. It's like, I love this, right? Kevin was a machine gunner. Dude, he was an 0331. He freaking put bullets in bodies at the cyclic. He loved combat. He loved being a machine gunner. There's nothing that brought more joy to his heart than to let an entire belt loose in a firefight. He loved it. It wasn't combat that he committed suicide over, though. And everyone has this perception of, oh, you went through all this combat and you got shot at and you got blown up and you saw your buddies dying and da-da-da-da and IEDs, da-da-da. And it's like, yeah, that happened, but that's not why guys are having problems. All right. Guys aren't killing themselves because, oh, I went through this horrible deployment in Sangin and like all my buddies died and why don't I just end it right now? It's like, no, man. They love the combat. Any Marine grunt who tells you that, like, oh man, like I went through too much combat, like I got shot at too many times, like I just want to end it. It's like, dude, you are so full of crap. This is what we signed up for, right? Why guys are killing themselves has very little to do with the combat that we went through. Guys are killing themselves because of stuff that's happened to them before the Marine Corps, because of stuff that's happened to them because they go through that super tight bond that we were just talking about, that little tight bond of that family feeling of like, you are with these guys to the very end. Literally, you are going to go into the middle of nowhere in this godforsaken village, and you will step on that IED or you will go forward. You will do this for each other. So you're so tight in that sense on deployment. And then you get back to the US and that tightness, that feeling, that family feeling is gone. It's like tribalism in a way. It's like everyone exists for each other, but you're completely gone. And that feeling does not exist in like civilized society in the United States, in Europe, and etc. It doesn't exist. It's not there because it's, capitalistic, because we're a society of individuals, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, let me bring up some examples to show the point that I'm trying to make. We look at, so I'll bring up this most recent example, and this comes into Silah Report and talking about Afghanistan and stuff. In Kabul, there are suicide bombs, there's civilian casualties all the time, but the suicide rate in Kabul is not near that as much as in the United States, because in Kabul, people die, like someone loses a family member to a random stupid suicide attack, by, it doesn't matter who, put your name in, whether, a Taliban group or Haqqani group or, ISIS affiliated group, it doesn't matter. Like someone loses their life, unfortunately, like, it's horrible. And people like feel the same way as people in the US when they lose a family member. It's like, man, my sister just got turned into like Swiss cheese on that street corner. Like, what the heck? But the difference is the people in Kabul have a social network they can turn on. They have a support network and they have a family network, and it's very tribal and it is very ancient in that sort of sense. And they suffer and they feel pain and it's emotional, but everyone sort of suffers together and everyone sort of comes in together and supports each other. So you have this social fabric to fall back on, right? The United States doesn't have that. You do not have that in the US. You get out of the Marines, you go to school, your family is already like this sort of nuclear family. Like you really only see maybe your mom, your dad, your siblings, and that's about it. In Kabul, you have like an extended family out like several generations and third, fourth, fifth removed cousins. It's like these people are tight with you. And then the United States, like you don't have any of that support network in that kind of way. So like that's, you want to talk about like why are guys killing themselves? That's why. It's not because they went through this traumatic experience of combat. It's like, are you kidding me? I'll go through a traumatic experience of combat any day of the week. I love that. It was one of the best experiences I ever had. It was great. I mean, I was a young man with a gun doing awesome rad stuff. It's like don't pity me for going on that kind of thing, and don't pity Schranz for doing that. Schranz loved being a machine gunner. Being a machine gunner was like one of the best jobs he ever had in his entire life. Don't pity Schranz and say, hey, oh man, Kevin went through all that combat. That's why he killed himself. That's not why he killed himself. He loved being a machine gunner. I mean, I don't know. I can go into this for another freaking hour, but like this is just like a basic point that I want to say, especially about Schranz's death and veteran suicide throughout all this stuff.
So the concept of veteran suicide, the issue we have here is not, an issue of, oh, you have traumatic experience, but it's kind of a emblematic of, I guess, just the alienation of modern society. Because like if you look at previous human societies, war was a part of human existence. They say something like 20% of human males in the Stone Age were killed by other males, but like going back from there until maybe the 1800s, like if you were a Mongol horseman or you were a Native American guy or like an ancient Viking tribe or whatever, like, yeah, you would have wars and you would have like tribal conflicts and stuff, but you'd be with your family. Like the whole concept of like being in a military unit and being with people you don't know and going overseas and then coming back is something that is like incredibly new in human history. And it almost kind of shows that it's not the combat that we're bothered from because humanity has a violent past, but it's just going from that experience and almost like the whiplash from like this ancient method of living and fighting and being in a group to like the modern world. I mean, would that be kind of a good encapsulation of the point in so many words?
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, I think the point that you're trying to make is like combat is not a new phenomena. Like, yeah, it's been happening since the Stone Age. So the fact that guys are killing themselves now, people need to get away from the fact that, oh, they're killing themselves because of combat. It's like, no, people have been doing this for thousands of years. If this was a real issue, people would have also been killing themselves thousands of years ago, and that doesn't, I don't think that's the case. The other point I want to say about this, and you bring that stuff up, and I want to say a point about this is that, going overseas and doing these wars and stuff, a very important point that no one is looking at, and especially that I've seen through my own eyes, and I've seen it with YPG fighters and Arab fighters in Syria and Rojava. I've seen it in KNLA fighters in Burma, Karen fighters in Burma. And there's a big difference between the wars that America is fighting and the sort of, as you were saying, like, a more traditional kind of war. Whereas you look at the YPG or you look at the KNLA and you look at people who have that tribal community, in this case, their tribe being their own people, like the very existence of their own people is on the line in this conflict. So they're fighting. So they're in that tribal community of fighting with and for their own people, whether that be their family or whether the people they're fighting with are, from that tribal community. They're fighting for a very clear and very definite cause of, no, we have to fight or else our existence as a civilization, as a people, will literally get wiped off the map. Whether it's, Yazidis fighting ISIS, YPG fighting the Turks, or the KNLA fighting the Burmese army, it's like, no, this is a fight for survival. And then what's hard for people to talk about is but a faith in God and a faith in religion and a faith in, I believe in God. I believe this is a just fight and stuff. Like, this is all here. It's like, it's almost like those three things, having that tribal community, fighting for your existence, and having, a strong belief in God. When you combine all three of those, that is like well, first of all, it's almost an unstoppable force because everyone is almost on the same page. And it's like, this is worth it. We have to be in this. We have to do this. So the sort of moral problems with that, they're very little. And it's like, no, we have to do this. There's nothing we can do to get around it. And then returning from that, everything is just in that way. It's, I did it because my tribe was on the line. I did it because we would have gotten wiped out. And I did it because I felt it was a godly thing to do. And I felt God throughout the entire time. A lot of fighters from these places, if you look at the YPG, if you look at the KNLA guys, and you look at like old vets from there, it's like they don't have this crazy suicide rate, and they don't have these crazy issues that we have in the United States. We need to think more about why this is. Well, when you send guys to war overseas for reasons that later turn out to be like bogus and stupid, and then it's like, you just like, man, my patrol base that we fought for in 2011 was overran by the Taliban in 2014, 2015. It's like what was the reason? Why did we do that? We first started experiencing this in Vietnam, the Korean War, etc. And you have these, you don't have those three things. You have a sort of almost godless society. You don't have this tribal network to come back to. You don't have this fighting for your existence. And it's like, well, these are the problems that you get when you don't go to war for the right reasons and you don't do these things. Because, I mean, and then again, to bring up your point about the Stone Age, right? We look at the Greeks, or we look at, Spartans or whatever, or the Persians. It's like they're going, like, these are all very localized conflicts. It's like they're going to war because everything lines up. And what we're doing today isn't. And then we can flip this around too. If we look at ISIS, for example, ISIS was, in the past decade, ever since the invasion of Iraq, ISIS fought harder, braver, and better than any other combatant in the Middle East or Central Asia. And this is, I talk to YPG guys, I talk to Iraqi army guys, and every single one of them always has the same thing to say about ISIS. They said, those guys knew what they were doing. They were super brave. They fought to the death, and they were effective as a fighting force, right? It's like, and that's because ISIS had all those things on their side. They had that tribal connection. They had that super strong belief in God. They had that point of, we're going to get wiped out if we don't do this. Okay. And they did get wiped out. I mean, thank God they got wiped out. But to the individual guys who were fighting, it's like they had all those check boxes, right? And like, you can say whatever you want about ISIS, and I don't agree with any of the stuff they did, and it's good that they got wiped out. But to a man, every single guy I've met who's fought ISIS and has gone against them, whether it's Iraqi, Syrian, American, whether it's an American SOF or American SOCOM or American infantry guys who are fighting ISIS, I have not met one guy who has legitimately been involved in combat against ISIS and been like, man, those ISIS guys, they were freaking cowards. They freaking sucked. We rolled them up every single time. And it was like, no, dude, they were an effective fighting force. And this is why, because they had those check boxes. Well, why do we have these issues like with guys coming back in the United States? We don't check any of those boxes. You come back to a society that is not there for you. You're fighting for a cause that you find out later was dumb. And then it's like there's just a lack of religion. There's no God here anymore. I mean, that's a very overstatement kind of thing. These are the kinds of things you get when you don't go for the right reasons.
Yeah, I agree totally. And like, I don't think you really even have to go ahead and state the obvious, like you don't agree, because like you can look throughout history and just any like ideology, any whatever, like the people who are fighting on it, if they genuinely believe that what they're fighting is true and what they're fighting is the right thing, and they're fighting for their family and they're fighting for their nation, hell, you can look at it in the Spanish Civil War. And then you get a very good example on a sense of like people are fighting because they generally not only believe it because their families are on the line, their entire livelihood is on the line, and in many cases, a lot of them were fighting for their religion as well. Because, for example, like some anarchist Spanish or could be raping nuns, destroying churches, and that fucking went ahead and really resonated with a lot of people. And you see very well like how that drive, would it be like religious, ideological, or just self-preservation for yourself and those around you, makes such a gigantic difference. And hell, the Soviets saw it firsthand because the Soviets were just there, and the Germans as well. Like they were just there having volunteers for like the guys at the bottom didn't really care, right? Like most of them probably didn't actually think they were furthering like communism around the world by helping the Republican Spain, and probably the same thing happened. They don't really think they're like helping like fascism across the world by helping Franco. However, they saw it firsthand. In many cases, wrote about it. It's like, damn, these guys really, really are fighting for what they believe in. In many cases, a guy just has like a single bolt action rifle, and he will not stop until he's out of ammunition, until he's dead. It really shows. So I completely agree with that, honestly.
Reminds me of a quote from Napoleon, and I know you're not a big fan of the big picture stuff, but it kind of shows to like the experience of the grunt and what you spoke about versus the big picture stuff. Napoleon had a quote that I really like where he said, in warfare, but also just in combat in general, the moral is to the physical 3-to-1. Is that idea that all of those moral factors are 3 times greater than any material factors in any kind of conflict, and it kind of goes, what you said kind of goes to prove that.
That's really good, actually. I like that. The moral is to the physical 3-to-1. I'm going to use that. That's good. I need to. No. It's absolutely true, man. Dude, you look at ISIS. You look at how, why did it take so long to put these guys in the dirt? Like throughout the battles of Mosul and Raqqa and Baghouz and everything. And it's like, dude, because they believed what they were fighting in, and they were like, they did it, and they were ferocious and they were tenacious. And it's like, that's why, it's like,
and
yeah. So what do you guys want to talk about next? Something lighthearted?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So we're getting hard on that anyway. I got a lighthearted question. How the fuck am I supposed to pronounce the actual like Silah?
Yeah,
Silah.
no. So it's funny. I was thinking about this recently. I was actually thinking about this. I was like, not a single American I've met has pronounced it right.
Okay, right. Because everyone that I've heard it as well, right? So they also say Silah Report, but that's not how you say it. You say Silah.
Yeah. So and I'll tell you a story with that. And the reason why we picked it, well, me and Haracha picked it, is because Silah is the same word in Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, and then Urdu somewhat, and then Pashto and Kurdish as well. All the dialects of Kurdish, which is like 12. But Silah, it means weapon in all those dialects and languages. In Urdu, it's more like Wisla, or in Pashto, it's more like Wisla. And the point of that was that we picked this word Silah, which means weapon, and the idea is like we're connecting from the Middle East to Central Asia, from the Maghrib in Morocco in the west, all the way up to Pakistan in the east. And it's the word that sort of binds a lot of the cultures together. And of course, we're looking at stuff in Central Asia, which is a lot of Turkic languages, and uses Russian, and we have Amazigh in the west, and we also have Hebrew and Israel and stuff. So it's like, there's a lot of places we cover that don't use the word Silah, right? But that was like a unifying theme between all of them. And that's the Turkish spelling, how it is on the website, how it is in the word Silah. The Arabic spelling and the Arabic and the Farsi spelling are the same within Arabic, and then the Pashto and the Urdu spelling are different. But it's funny because I get a lot of Turks who come up to me, or I'm talking in the course of conversation. They're like, "Oh, your group, like Silah Report," and they're like, "Oh, well, did you know that like Silah means weapon in Turkish?" And I'm just like very politely like, "Yes, that's why I picked it, and that's why I spelled it. That's
entirely
why it's
intentional."
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're trying to sometimes they're trying to like one up me, and they're trying to be like, oh, did you know this? It's like golden nugget fact that I'm about to like drop bombs on you with? And I'm like, yes, you're actually dropping a dud. Yeah, it's just something like that. It's just always funny because like Turks always do that because the spelling is in the Turkish language. So it's like,
Right.
yes, I actually did know that silah was spelt and meant weapon in Turkish in that way. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and you actually bring up a good point there about especially what you do, and I feel you're great at it, is the being patient with people and the sensitivity with culture, especially, and being polite to others. I'm sure has gotten you really far into the MENA sphere itself. And we did talk about it the last podcast, but I felt like it's definitely something that, you know, we as Americans, we're always stereotypical. The idea of us is that we are very harsh and too direct, not polite at all when it comes to other cultures, and trying to either be sensitive or learn the proper way. It's kind of funny, you know, talking to folks, and especially you being very connected to your contacts in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and whatnot. So it's always excellent to hear about these things and to read what Silah Report has to put out.
Well, thanks, man. We really appreciate that from the whole team of Haracha, Adam, Omar, Matt Motz at this point, Marwan, Yoel, everyone. And it's like, no, so to break it down, like the reason why we're trying to do that is we are trying to take a sort of an almost anthropological perspective in looking at small arms of these areas, and we're trying to like dig that wedge between what like hey, we're trying to say, hey everyone, look over here, there's some really fascinating and really cool aspects of small arms usage in these areas that no one else is looking at in this perspective. You know, the political analysts and the religious experts and the geopolitical and anthropology guys, they're all looking over here, and then the gun guys are all looking over here, and we're like, no, check this out over here, like this is some really cool stuff. And part of that approach is taking that sort of very respectful, very like, tell me how it is. I don't want to put my judgment on this. Like, I'll put my internal judgment on it all day, but I'll put my researcher hat on and I'll be like, okay, why are people doing this? Why are people naming this gun this way? Is this technique a thing? Like, let's get to the bottom of this. Why is this a thing? How do we understand it? And how do we explain it? And how do we use it to explain later things as well? And that's part of where research comes down to. It's like, okay, I understand this thing over here because of X, Y, and Z. How do I use that to understand this over here, which is in a completely different scenario? So, but yeah.
One thing I wanted to cover and give a spotlight on, especially the cool things you're doing with the Silah Report shop, the chest rigs and your patches and all the new offerings. I definitely wanted to give you a little bit of a platform to talk about those.
The thing so first of all, the thing that we take to heart at Silah Report is we need to fund everything, whether that's paying for writers, whether that's paying for databases, whether that's paying for things to uphold the website. So, and we take that very seriously because it's like we work with a lot of people, and we need to compensate people for like, okay, you're going to write this article for us, we need to pay you this much. Okay, you know, you're going to collect this or do this or check this out. We take that really seriously at that point. We believe that, you know, work needs to be compensated in that way. Now, in order to do that, it's like, okay, well, where did you get the money from? And so we're trying to break the mold of, if you want, especially within like sort of small arms research and identification and stuff, the previous mold has been, you go to some of these political organizations or that are out there, and usually they're very focused, right? And they're very like, okay, we will give you this amount of money because we want to know like the terrorist connection between guns that are going from this part of the world to that part of the world. And that's how you get the money and the funding to fund the research into figuring out how those guns got there. All right. We're trying to break that mold, and we're trying to say, no, we're going to fund ourselves, and we're going to research these guns because we see the technical aspect and we want to see how they got there. And we're going to research them in our own way that we feel is important, right? Because, for example, a lot of these research projects, they're very like, if you want to look at a technical study of firearms, a lot of these research projects are sometimes like very like sort of one-sided. It's like we're only interested in, we're only interested in like, how many European guns have showed up in this country over X amount of years or whatever, because we want to prove that we want to make all these European gun laws like justifiable or something, right? And what we're saying is that no, dude, there's so much more to unpack and study here. We want to look at stuff like names. We want to look at stuff like accessories. We want to look at stuff like how are names for these guns used in Arabic, and what are the price points of this stuff, and what are the modifications, and what are the improvisations that happen, and then how do people refer to these things, and how do people use these things, and why are some guns more valued than others and stuff. And we want to see that, right? But in order to do that, you got to fund yourself. So the idea of the Silah shop is, no, we're going to do gun research overseas in the way that we want to do it, and we're not going to need other people to fund us to be able to do this. We're going to be self-sufficient and fund ourselves. And that's the point of the Silah shop, is in order to get funding from the Silah shop, bring this stuff like vests, YPG fabric covers, Rojava AK stocks. It's like, we know the market in the US, we know people are into this cool, eccentric, unique stuff, and we're going to either A, reproduce it, or B, get the actual thing and bring it back to the United States and then sell it in the US. People are going to dig it. They like it. They're interested in it. It's unique. It's fascinating. Get that and then use that to fund the research that we want to do. And we do not have a sort of political spin on this. It's like, well, we only want to see like guns that are from this European country, like how many of them showed up in this area kind of thing. It's like, no, man, we want the holistic approach and we want to fund the whole thing. And that's the point of that sort of deal. In addition to that kind of thing, pushing out the articles and the database and stuff like that. And the point of the database is to be like, okay, I want researchers to be able to say, all right, this is a Hakim rifle over here. Well, do you want to see like the 500 examples of Hakims that are sold in the US? Do you want to see examples that are sold in Iraq? Do you want to see examples that are sold in Yemen? Do you want to see a Hakim field manual in Arabic from, the Egyptian Ministry of Defense, published 1956 or something? Do you want to see the earliest usage of the Hakim of the 1950s? Do you want to see the latest usage by the Egyptian government? Do you want to see its uses in Yemen? Do you want to see it used in popular cinema, in Egyptian cinema, in outside cinema? It's like all these relationships that are built there that have to do with the firearm, because the studying a firearm isn't just the study of the sort of mechanical object. It's also the study of the accessories, the popular conception, the experience in battle, the experience of civilians, the experience of this and that, how things are portrayed in the United States, how they're changed, how they're modified. And that's sort of the idea behind that.
The fact you guys are like really doing the full story, like not just the mechanical aspect, which is neat, but it's just one aspect of it. You guys are going the whole story. How did certain firearms get there? How they're actually used? It's really fucking cool.
Well, it's like what you were talking about with your RG Madisons, how they ended up in Brazil. It's it's the full circle thing. There has to be a technical understanding. There has to be a geopolitical understanding. There has to be a historical understanding. There has to be all this stuff compounded in of each other. It's like, dude, you can't just look at it in like, one weird way. It's like, you have to know like, all right, so the Madisons were originally in this other caliber, and then they were converted to 308, and that's why Brazilian police actually find them useful today, because they can't use that other archaic 100-year-old caliber. Now they have to use it in 308 because that's useful, but how they got there was because they were stolen from these dudes, and then they came over the border, and this is how that happened. It's like, it's the holistic approach to it kind of thing. And yeah, I've never liked the sort of one-sided aspect of that. I don't know.
It's just too sterile. It doesn't paint you the full picture, because guns, they are like in every case they're inherently political, but not because where they are used always to push political agendas, but because guns are used in every single political thing, every single ideology, whatever. And the fact that, like, for example, in the one that I was telling you earlier about how like these Argentine Matsons ended up being used by Brazilian police, right? It comes to the political aspect, because, for example, Argentina had adopted like a bunch of FALs. And they had to like go ahead, and they're like, oh shit, what if we get a war? So we gotta fucking go ahead, and like Imbel in Brazil, who's currently controlled by another dictator who's friendly to us, are gonna go ahead and help us out with this. And then later on, it's like, okay, now Brazil is going through this like socialist government that really doesn't trust police and military, so they got like budget cuts and basically no money. So then now that's why Brazil started like using a bunch of the guns that they're just capturing from the favelas, and getting that full picture. That's what really fucking matters. You're actually telling everything, not just like little sterile little bits and bobs about stuff. And I love that.
many people's first gun was a Mosin, instead of something else. And I'm sure how many people in our audience have sat there and looked at that Mosin and looked at the dings and looked at the repairs and thought, man, like, what happened to this gun? What was the involvement in this? Like, who carried this? And kind of looked into history a little further because of that. I had that experience, and like Silah Report is like that same impulse, but like one 19-year-old guy looking at a Mosin Nagant and a spam can.
I'm glad you bring that up, is like, a random like 19-year-old looking at a Mosin Nagant, because it's like, if you look at it from the sort of philosophical way, like a firearm is like the smallest sort of military item that is also serious enough that it has to be treated or used or passed on, kind of thing. I mean, for example, it's like, one country gets a surplus of guns from over here, and then they use them for a while, they're in service, and they have to surplus them, but then they have to, sell them off to here. You don't sell off boots or spoons or canteen cups. It's like, you don't just get these canteen cups and then you're like, oh man, like, oh, we can't use these canteen cups anymore. What are we going to do with these canteen cups? It's like, I don't know, like, oh, should we sell them to this army over here? Or should we sell them back to the US or something? It's like, no one ever like resells canteen cups, But firearms are like, well, it's like it's still an implement of service. It can still be used. So in the case of those RG, Madsons, like, yeah, they can still be pushed on. They're still usable. Like, they can still, put a bullet in a body. They're still there for that purpose, right? So they're the smallest sort of item in that sense that has to be moved on, and that's how we eventually get them, right? But then again, they're also the smallest of this item. You can actually hold it in your hand. You can pick it up. You can turn it around. You can disassemble it. You can look at the markings. You can actually hold it, right? You can't hold a tank. You can't hold a Spitfire. You can't hold an aircraft carrier, all right? You just can't do that, okay? So it makes them so much more like tangible, relatable, and so much more easier to like just hold in your hand and be like, crap, man, this is a gun that was used in this conflict, bought by these dudes, used in that conflict, surplused out to these guys, and then somehow it got bought by this international arms dealer and then sold back in the US, where I bought it at freaking, I don't know, Walmart. And now I have it in my room, in my mom's basement, and I'm looking at it and I'm holding it. And guess what? Tomorrow I can go out and I can shoot it, and I will feel and see the exact same thing that the first guy this thing was issued to. I will go through the same experience that guy went through. And again, that's that visceral experience. Not to bring this full circle, but it's like, that's the kind of person I am. I'm into this sort of visceral experience. It's like, that's what it was like to shoot a Mosin Nagant at another guy like 100 years ago. Boom, into your shoulder. Did I hit the target or not? 100 meters. There we go. You can't do that with a T-34. You can't do that with a Sherman. You can't buy a Sherman at Walmart, So
sadly.
Sadly, it's like, you can, you can go to a museum and you can like, oh, there's a Sherman. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I can see the size and dimensions, and okay, that's da-da-da. But it's like, all right, well, can you drive it? Can you tell me how wicked it is to like whip around a turn in a Sherman, or can you do donuts in a Sherman or something? No, you can't, unless you're super rich. So for the majority of people in the world, it's like a firearm you can do that with. It's this tangible experience that's like awing when you pick it up and you're like, wow, like this thing was used in Vietnam, or this thing was used in the Second World War. That's pretty cool. You can't do that with anything else.
So you recently gone ahead and you released like the stonks and like the sort of like, it looks like shoulder rigs to me, like for the one that you get like the 4 AK mags and 2 grenade pouches. And what else do you have? Well, you also got patches on the store. What else do you have planned for ahead? Is there anything stuff that you can tell us about that? Oh, we'd really like to get this, and that.
Patches are a big thing. I want to get Afghan patches. We have access to one of the patch makers in Kabul, and I want to get every single firearm themed patch that he has. So he does patches for the Afghan army and the Afghan police. So anything that includes a gun, I want to bring patches over and sell them. Then in terms of the leather goods are really fascinating, because the leather goods, they're in that void where they're not a firearm. So we don't have to go through all the crap that firearm regulations involve in bringing over to the United States. And they're these leather handmade goods that, like, importing chest rigs from Afghanistan falls in the exact same category as like carpets or purses, right? So there's very little regulation in it, and that opens up a lot of ways, because in the United States, these sort of leather chest rigs, it's like they're cool. People dig them. It's like a taste of the old world that we just don't have anymore. And especially within the AK community, because the AK community there's so much like passion and emotion that comes with a lot of AK guys. They buy into the history and the culture, and they buy into the different countries that produced it and stuff. Like mine's Romanian or mine's Bulgarian or whatever. So the leather goods are something that we'd really like to expand in. And what's cool about that is that a lot of the countries that we look at have their own leather goods, right? And it's all unique to the country. So the chest rigs that you see in Afghanistan, they don't exist in Iraq. They don't exist in Yemen. They're of a different style. They have a different requirement. They're completely different elsewhere. Okay. It's not like this pan Middle Eastern, Central Asian thing. And that's another issue. It's like, what happens in Afghanistan doesn't happen in Iraq. They're completely different cultures and languages and requirements of the fighters and the combatants and the civilians in both countries. It's like they're not even on the same wavelength, man. You can't you like, I don't know, when people talk about like, Afghanistan and Iraq, it's like, and I don't know, they try to compare the two to each other. They're not comparable to each other. They're completely different languages, cultures, religions, everything. So why would the chest rigs be the same as well? They wouldn't, right? So, but to that end, the Peshmerga have some really cool chest rigs that we'd really like to bring in. They have these sort of double layered versions, double layered belts that the Peshmerga actually used in the 1960s and 70s, especially with Barzani when he was fighting the regime previous to Saddam, and he was actually fighting guys in the mountains with Czech Mausers and stuff, and they have these intricate rigs and stuff, and they're pretty cool. So we'll see if we can get a bite on that. But yeah, that's what I'd like to do. I mean, in our World War II shoot on TFB TV, which to this day, I don't know, I've made probably 100 or 150 TFB TV videos. In my personal opinion, not a single one of them stacks against that World War II shoot. Yet my million view video is like some dumb thing on this stupid, like, I don't know, suppressor that SOE made in the Second World War. It's like, people find that interesting. Why don't you find the video that we made where we like recreated a World War II paratrooper squad and we ran a live fire range? It's like, that's one of the most amazing things I've ever put in the video. And it's like, that only has like, I don't know, 70,000 views. It's like, freaking whatever. But talk about that visceral experience. It's when we were doing that event, it's like you're finding out the stuff that guys had to go through with an M1 Grand in the Second World War. Talking about like, they had cardboard sections that were around the end block clips, and that's how the packaged bandoliers came in. It's like, this is what guys had to deal with. It's like, yeah, that is that visceral sort of, and this goes back again. I want to know what that dude on the ground with that gun in that battle, in that experience, I want to know what he went through, man. I want to know. I want to step into his shoes for 1 minute, for 30 seconds. I want to know, what was that like? Right. So, and then looking at those chest rigs, it's like, that's that kind of thing again. It's like, yeah, this is the fact of the matter,
Thank you again, Miles, for joining us on the Commando Blog podcast. I'm so glad we were able to discuss your book. Of course, I feel like we were especially fortunate that we were able to expound upon some seriously complex topics, even. I sort of sat on in favor of being the listener this time around, but I've got to say your explanations are always fantastic and to the point. So, Miles, if you'd be so kind as to tell our viewers where they can find you, your work with Silah Report, and in addition, where they can find your new book.
Sure, man. And thank you once again. It was really an honor to be on again for the second time. Wow. Like, how many times do people get to say that, like, as a guest to anywhere? Holy crap. First of all, you can find it on Amazon. It's like $22 there right now or something. That's if you just want a plain Jane book. If you want an autographed version and you want it to contribute to the Silah Report shop and all the stuff that we just talked about before, it's on the Silah Report shop, which is on the Silah Report website, SILAH report.com, the Turkish spelling of Silah. And then we're on social media as well. I mean, just type in Silah Report in whatever search bar you're on and you'll find us.
All right, thank you so much for that. And we even have the discount code available here that will pop up on screen, TKB member for $5 off. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Miles.
Yes, and thank you. And I really appreciate it, Don. It's a great thing that you're doing with TKB. And wow, if I'm on for a third time, I don't know how I'm like that third time's a charm. I don't know what that's going to be about. Like, holy crap.
I think the first repeat guest on our podcast, so it's really an honor to have you, and it's great to be your friend. So from all of us at TKB, thank you very much for watching, and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Night.